We all know that mistakes happen, even when translating the Bible. But there's one such error that makes a difference more than any other. John chapter 6, verse 4.
Is the greatest error in the New Testament John 6:4? I don't think so. The greatest error in the New Testament is much larger than John 6:4. The greatest error in the New Testament is the translation of the word believe. This mistranslation is used to support the doctrine of believe only, and as I will demonstrate in this video, it's an incorrect translation, and the doctrine that derives from it is also the greatest error of Christendom. I would like to remind you now that the majority have gone astray, so I will reread Matthew 7:21 to 23. Not everyone who says to me, Adonai, Adonai, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Adonai, Adonai, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will confess to them, I never acknowledged you. Be departing from me, you who practice lawlessness. Do you see that Yeshua says that only those who do the will of his Father in heaven will enter the kingdom of heaven? And do you see that those who practice lawlessness will be tossed out of the kingdom? Let me read you another text, this time from Paul, just to show that there wasn't a change between Yeshua and Paul. This is from Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I warned you before, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of the Almighty. From the Good News of Messiah translation. Revelation chapter 3, starting with verse 4. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, because they are worthy. He who overcomes will thus be dressed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the scroll of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before his messengers. He who is having an ear should hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. Let's read a little context from before this verse to find out what he's talking about. Verse 2. Be becoming watchers, and strengthen the things that remain, which have been about to die, because I have not been finding your deeds, having been getting completed in the sight of my Almighty. Be remembering, therefore, what you have been receiving and heard, and be keeping it, and repent. If therefore you may not have kept watch, I will come like a thief, and you shall not have known at what hour I will come upon you. Okay, let's look at John 3:16 from the King James Version. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The believe-only doctrine is derived from whosoever believeth in him. This word is used many other times in the English translations made by church scholars, but it is incorrect. It is the foundation of the believe-only doctrine, and we see that there is a huge discrepancy between the words of Yeshua, Paul, and Yeshua in the book of Revelation again. The root verb we are dealing with here in the Greek language is pistepho. I will be discussing Hebrew and Aramaic verbs a little bit later, and I will show that they also have the same meaning. But we will start with the Greek text. The verb pistepho is derived from the Greek word pistos, which is an adjective, and from pistos is derived the noun pistis. The words pistos, pistis, and pistepho are what we would call the pistis word group. They're all derived from the same root. They should all have a related meaning. So let us look at the meaning of each of these words. Let's look on BibleHub.com in the online interlinear here. We want to look at an occurrence of the adjective pistos, is how it would be pronounced. Here's a dative form of it, pisto. And what we want to see is how it should be translated here. This believing is not correct. The translator of the interlinear is actually deceiving the reader by putting a translation in that's incorrect. So let's click on this and look up the word. Okay, here we see that the word pistos means faithful, reliable. Scrolling down to Thayer's lexicon, trusty, faithful. Looking over here in a concordance, we see faithful, faithful. It's consistently translated as faithful, faithful. Pistos, piste. Different conjugate. It's a different case ending on pistos. Pistos, faithful, faithful, faithful. Here we see a mistranslation creeping in. Believers, actually faithful ones. It's just a plural form of the word faithful. The only difference was plural. It should be a faithful Jewish woman. Faithful, 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 faithful. What the church translators are now trying to do is they're trying to gradually eliminate the word faithful. But they haven't succeeded yet. It's still in the dictionary, very heavily used in the translations. Only some of the more modern translations are substituting the word believer or believing for faithful. Let's now correct this. There we go. The faithful Abraham. The faithful Abraham. All right. I've just shown that the Greek word pistos, the adjective, means faithful. Now let's go to the noun pistis. If we have an adjective and we derive a noun from it, how would we translate faithful to a noun? We would get faithfulness. So now let's examine the word pistis and see if it indeed means faithfulness. The translators want to universally translate this word faith. They want to shorten it from faithfulness to faith. But in our current language, the words faithfulness and faith have different meanings. Okay, I've opened up our interlinear again here, and this time we're going to look at the noun pistis, which is here translated in Romans 3:22 as faith. Let's look up the word. Okay, we have Strong's Concordance here opened up. We see that we have two definitions of pistis, faith and faithfulness. Notice Thayer's lexicon, this particular point here, used in the Septuagint for emunah. That's the Hebrew word for faithfulness. Here we go, definition 2 in Thayer's lexicon. Fidelity, faithfulness. In the third edition of the BDAG lexicon, this would be the first definition. Occurrences of pistis in the New Testament, made up of these forms here. Okay, I've opened up all 243 occurrences of pistis. Let's see how many times they translated it faithfulness. It says I get 5 matches on this page. First match, Matthew 23:23. Clearly that counts for 2 matches. So it's only 1 verse. Romans 3:3, used once there. That makes 2 verses. King James, not at all. Galatians 5:22, pistis, faithfulness. That makes 3 verses. And we see it's repeated again here for our 5th time. Pistis out of 243 times is translated faithfulness only 3 times. Let's look at the Hebrew equivalent, Habakkuk 2:4, emunato, and the noun form is emunah. See, they mistranslated it here. But let's look up Strong's. There we go, emunah, emunah. Firmness, steadfastness, fidelity. Notice that they left faithfulness out of Strong's Concordance. They left it out of the main headword of Brown, Driver, and Briggs Hebrew Dictionary. However, it does show up down here. Faithfulness, 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 even in conjunction with Habakkuk 2:4. Emunah appears 49 times. Remember how we got 5 matches for faithfulness in the New Testament, and it was only 3 verses? Well, here we get 70 matches. Since some of the translations double up, out of 49 usages, it might be about 30 verses. Let's look at a few. Faithfulness, faithfulness. Deuteronomy 32:4. A God of faithfulness. El Emunah, Bet Emunah, literally in faithfulness. But this has been obscured by translating the word Emunah with an adjective, faithfully, often translated pistos in the Septuagint version. It seems to me the Greek translator was trying to avoid using pistis for faithfulness. Bet Emunah, literally in faithfulness. Same here. In faithfulness, all his work, faithfulness, and all his work, faithfulness, literally, and all his work in faithfulness. Bet emunah, emunatecha, your faithfulness, emunatecha. Once again in Psalm 37:3, emunah, faithfulness, faithfulness, Psalm 40:10, emunatecha. Notice even the King James Version is translating faithfulness. Like I said, 70 matches. Wonder how many verses that represents. Let's count them up. 1, 2, 26, 27, 27 times out of 49 times that the Hebrew word occurs. 5 matches for faithfulness in the New Testament. Let's see how many of those matches are from the King James. NAS? King James? No. King James? No. It looks like the word faithfulness has been completely eradicated from the King James. It has only crept into, the word faithfulness has only crept back into about 3 different texts, since modern translators have a hard time justifying eliminating all the occurrences of faithfulness. Actually, they aren't justified in eliminating the other 200 plus times too. Now we're back over here, Romans 3:22. Let's make a correction here. Let's make another correction here. This is a genitive case. To translate it from is highly unusual. That's something one might do in classical Greek. Koine Greek was using the words apo or ek to translate from. This should say of. So let's fix that. While I was at it, I corrected his name also. Let's correct this word too. There we go. This word also needs correcting. One will see that the French translations have the word justice here, and the Spanish translations have justicia. It's only in the English language that a division has occurred between justice and righteousness. We can improve this word. There we go. We can improve this one. I will not give a full argument for this now. Of the Almighty. The justice yet of the Almighty through the faithfulness of Yeshua. For now, let's concentrate on the key part of this verse. Through the faithfulness of Yeshua. A lot of scholars are now arguing that faithfulness is the correct translation here. N.T. Wright, the Net Bible, even Daniel Wallace has this translation in his Greek grammar. What is the faithfulness of Yeshua? Faithfulness of Yeshua is his work to die for our sins and rise again from the dead, to restore the covenant of old. All right, I've shown you the definition faithfulness for pistis in the online resources. Now let's take a quick look at the BDAG lexicon and the 3rd edition. Here's the 3rd edition of the BDAG Greek lexicon. 3rd edition. Here's the definition of pistis. Definition 1. A. Faithfulness, reliability, fidelity, commitment. The real definitions are faithfulness and fidelity. Synonyms, fidelity and faithfulness. Here's the corresponding adjective definition. Pistos. Definition 1. Trustworthy, faithful. We see the common denominator with the root meaning is faithful. In the case of the verb pistepho, generally speaking, the Christian resources or lexicons have censored the definition. They have left out the proper definition, which is to be faithful or to hold faithful. So we will have to go back and do the work that the lexicons failed to do, or the lexicographers failed to do. The way they determine the meaning of words is they look at the usage of a word in many different contexts. The problem with their research is they come to the context with a preconceived notion of what the text should mean, rather than filtering out what the text means in its original context and the original theology of the Torah and the prophets. What we will find is that we can derive the meaning of the word using the remnants or preserved parts of other parts of speech. Pistos is the adjective form of the word. Pistis is the noun form of the word. Pistepho is the verb form. The meanings should all connect. Faithful, faithfulness, be faithful. Many verbs are derived from their corresponding adjectives. In the case of pistepho, it is derived from pistos. The argument that pistepho means to be faithful or hold faithful ultimately depends upon observation and logic. We cannot base the argument on authority because the authorities are incorrect. It is clearly a contradiction for Yeshua to say in one place that only those who do the will of his Father will enter the kingdom of heaven, and in another place, those who believe. The doctrine of believe only reduces salvation to a mere intellectual exercise. Belief is credence, something that goes inside one's head. It doesn't actually cover the domain of doing or obeying. Yeshua says, only he who does the will of my Father in heaven shall enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 7:22. Supposedly, he says, whosoever believeth in him shall enter the kingdom of heaven. This is actually a contradiction to say, whosoever believeth, but only those who do the will of his Father in heaven. For it is quite possible to believe something without doing the will of God. Since the church has so thoroughly corrupted its dictionaries and lexicons, the truth can only be restored by logical observation, or by making observations of the language and then applying reason and logic to the observations. The observation is that pistos, pistis, and pistepho are all related to each other, an adjective, a noun, and a verb of the same word. The Church's lexical resources claim that the word pistepho is derived from the verb pitho. It doesn't make sense to derive one verb from another verb in etymology, when actually a closer derivation would be from the adjective of the same word group, pistos. Etymology is an art based on word similarities in the first place. It's not an exact science. So there is every reason to doubt the Church's claim that pistepho should be derived from the verb pitho. The logic of the situation contradicts their conclusion. If we go and find out how the Greek Septuagint translates the Greek verb pitho, we will find that it goes back to the Hebrew verb batak, which means to trust or security. If we look and see how the Septuagint translates the verb pistepho, we will find that it goes back to the Hebrew verb aman, which means to support something, to be loyal, to support a king, to be loyal to him, to give one's fidelity to him. The Septuagint consistently translates the verb batak using the Greek verb pitho. The Septuagint consistently translates the Hebrew verb aman using the Greek verb pistepho. Clearly, the source verbs in Hebrew are two different verbs. So why in Greek should we say that one verb is derived from the other? Why should we say that pistepho is derived from pitho? Pitho means to persuade. Pistepho means to be faithful. to hold faithful. The reason for the false etymology is to support the false conclusion that pistepho only means to believe something and does not mean to be faithful. Therefore, they derived it from the verb to mean trust or to be persuaded, pitho, going back to the Hebrew batak. But the Septuagint keeps the two verbs separate. It keeps them separate because the Hebrew keeps them separate, translating the concept of support someone or loyalty with the verb aman and the concept of trust with the verb batak. There are clues in the lexicons that the Church erred in suppressing the meaning. For example, if we look at the verb aman, hemin, in Syriac, we will find that in Jesse Payne Smith, it means to be faithful. If we look at the adjective, we will find faithful. If we look at the noun, we will find faithfulness. If we look in the Hebrew dictionary, we will find suggestions that the Hebrew verb aman can mean be faithful. Now, as I have said, the etymological derivation of the verb pistepho leads us to believe that the definition should be faithful or hold faithful. Usage, however, brings up several nuances of the verb, which are very important to our translation. One of these nuances is the idea of a pledge of loyalty or an affirmation of faithfulness. Studies of first century Greek, especially in Josephus, have shown that he uses the noun pistis to mean a pledge, as in a pledge of loyalty. It would then only follow that the verb pistepho means to make a pledge of loyalty, an affirmation of faithfulness, or to confirm one's faithfulness to someone else. This usage appears to be motivated by the Hebrew sense of the verb aman in the hefel, which would mean to make one's support to someone, or to put one's support on someone, or to give one's pledge of faithfulness to another. And of course, we cannot exclude the sense of pistepho, where it is actually used in the context to mean to believe something, only it is framed from a slightly different point of view. It means to hold something faithful which someone else says or proposes as a truth. Within the general derivation of be faithful, or the verb pistepho, we have several nuances that we need to carefully consider. These nuances are based upon the usages of the verb. The verb pistepho is derived from the noun pistis in the first level of etymological derivation. An examination of the usage of pistis in the first century will show that it means a pledge, as in a pledge of loyalty. This usage for the noun pistis shows up quite frequently in the writings of the first century Jewish historian Josephus. It only stands to reason then that the verb form pistepho means a pledge of loyalty, to confirm one's loyalty to or affirm one's loyalty to another. Another usage we need to be concerned with, which is actually the sense that means believe in terms of its results, is to hold something faithful. In other words, if one person makes a statement of truth, then he can ask if another person holds it faithful. Do you hold the prophets faithful? Do you hold what they say faithful? This sense approaches the sense of believe. However, it is stated in a different way, in the broad sense of holding something reliable or faithful or trustworthy. So the sense of believe in the dynamic sense can be achieved from the word pistepho. The problem isn't that it doesn't mean believe in some senses. The problem is that the sense of pistepho is not just limited to believe. The sense actually extends outside of the mind and outside of just pure credence. It is only the context which would limit the meaning of the word to credence in those cases where the object of the verb has to do with a stated truth which one is saying that they hold faithful. So we have three basic uses of the usage of the verb. We have a pledge of loyalty, we have to hold something faithful, And finally, we have the plain sense derived from the etymology, which is to hold faithful to someone or to be faithful to someone. The two senses have to be distinguished by context. If the context is emphasizing the beginning of one's loyalty, then it's a pledge of loyalty. If the context is emphasizing holding faithful throughout, then the sense would to be faithful or to hold faithful to someone. Also important in the usage of pistepho is the sort of preposition that occurs after the verb. If the preposition is occurs after the verb, then the sense of to is added to it, in the sense of to affirm faithfulness to pledge faithfulness to hold faithful to. If the preposition in is after the verb, then the sense would be to hold faithful in, or to pledge faithful on, or to pledge one's faithfulness onto or into someone. The book of John frequently uses the preposition after the verb to make it plain that it's the pledge of loyalty to someone. So all of these various senses have to be considered when looking at the context. What is improper, and what I'm going to exclude, is to limit the sense to believe only, when clearly the context falls in line with the larger sense, wider sense of the verb. If we were to draw a Venn diagram of the verb pistepho and its associated meanings, we would have to draw a very large circle. If we were to draw a circle for the English sense of believe, we would draw a small circle within the very large circle. The applications of pistepho are quite broader than the sense of just believe. Believe is just pistepho used with an object of a factum or a datum to be believed. But pistepho can also be used with a personal object to hold faithful to someone, where the object of the pistepho is a person. In this case, it's to pledge loyalty to someone, to affirm one's loyalty, affirm faithfulness, to pledge faithfulness, to confirm one's faithfulness. The fact that pistepho is derived from the noun pistis, and that pistis is used extensively in Josephus to mean a pledge, suggests that pistepho means to make a pledge. Also, the usage of the Hebrew verb aman in the hefel, he'amin, show that he'amin has a basic sense of make one's pledge or to give one's support to another, to give one's faithfulness to another. This sense is also used in Kim Heath's Hebrew Dictionary from about the 13th century. So the usages we have to be concerned with are threefold. One, to make a pledge to another, a pledge of fidelity or loyalty. Another, second definition, would be to hold faithful to someone, to be faithful to someone. And a third definition would be to hold a factum or a datum to be faithful, to be trustworthy. These three usages cover the context in which pistepho is used. So we will see in the examination of the translations and the context that sometimes pistepho is used in a context which indicates the beginning of pistepho, the beginning of holding faithful, to affirm one's faithfulness to, pledge faithfulness to. In other contexts, it has to do with continuing in faithfulness, in which sense would be to be faithful or holding faithful. And finally, in a third set of context, the object is a datum or a factum to be believed, in which case it would be to hold the fact or the bit of information to be faithful. Okay, now I would like to give a few examples of how the verb is used. We'll start in John chapter 3 and verse 15. And this is a case of holding faithful or being faithful in a more or less continuous sense. So let's correct the text here. All right, here we go. So that anyone holding faithful in him may be inheriting life everlasting. Holding faithful. Preposition en, him. So it has an object. This is talking about a continuous loyalty to Messiah. I changed the word every to any, which fits better. We have a definite article here, which could be translated as the one or one. And I got rid of the word eternal over here and put everlasting. Eternal is overloaded with philosophical notions from the theologians. And then this is a present subjunctive, so I made it more present. May be inheriting, and the may is the subjunctive part. So that anyone holding faithful in him may be inheriting life everlasting. And down below, I put the Good News of Messiah translation. Okay, for the second example, I would like to use John 3:16. We see we have here the participle pistephon eis afton. And so let's make the corrections. Okay, that's the first correction, confirming faithfulness. Should be translated to. Okay, we've made that correction. We need to correct this word. I went over this in one of my first videos. Ho, definite article. Ho theos. Let's correct this. The Almighty. Let's improve these two words. This is an aorist subjunctive. Let's give it an aorist subjunctive flavor. For this, I use the future perfect. Will being used in the sense of may. This is a present subjunctive. Again, we have the philosophically loaded word eternal. All right, in this case, the sense of pistephon, which fits the context, is the pledge of faithfulness or the pledge of loyalty. That is the beginning of faithfulness. So I have translated it confirming faithfulness to him. And you can see that we have the word eis to him. So we have a personal object here. The verb is being used in the sense of pledging loyalty. Okay, for the last example, I'm going to use John 5:46. And in this sense, we're going to find some senses that reduce to believing. But we'll see that it's done in a roundabout way. So let's fix the translation. There, holding faithful. Let's work on this one now. All right, I dashed out gar here. I have translated this word because, and I have put it in front of the if, which is standard operating procedure. We'll do the same thing here. All right, this word on corresponds to the word would over here. I'm not going to put would over here. It's correctly dashed out there. And I'll show you what the translators usually say about this word. On, usually untranslatable, but generally denoting supposition, wish, possibility, or uncertainty. As I said, in this case, it corresponds to the word would. Okay, let's read what we got. Because if you were holding faithful Moses, you would have held faithful me. This is the same sense of believe or considered trustworthy. Because if you were believing Moses, you would have believed me.